Yo, yo, yo. Hey, guys, welcome back to another awesome edition of the Best Practices Show podcast. My name is Kirk Behrendt. I'm so pumped. I get the great responsibility of finding you the best thinkers, the best teachers, and the best transition experts in all of dentistry to help you create a better practice and a better life. And if you're a specialist, you're thinking, someday I got to transition. What do I need to know about selling a specialty practice? And I bring in my good friend, Paul Sletten, to dispel a lot of the rumors that you have that are floating around inside and outside of your brain. And it is an awesome episode. So check it out. Hope you guys enjoy it. We'll see you soon. Hey guys, welcome back to the Best Practices Show podcast, where our goal is to bring you the best thinkers, the best teachers, the best influencers, and the best transition experts in all of dentistry to help you improve your practice and your life. And today, one of the things that you guys might be thinking about or struggling with, if you're a specialty practice, is what do I do? Is selling a specialty practice different than selling a GP practice? And I think it is. And so I got my good friend Paul Sletten on today, who is a transitions genius and he's gonna point the way to how to think about this. Paul, thanks for being on, buddy. I appreciate you.
My pleasure. Good to see you again.
It's always good to see you. I always learn a ton, and I'm just going to say this. He's not asking me to say this, but Paul's always been there for me. Any question I have that's difficult and way outside my circle, I call Paul, and I'm like, Paul, am I thinking about this right? Am I seeing this right? And he's quick to say, no, you're not. So I just really appreciate you. And you've been on the podcast many times before, but we have a lot of new listeners now, Paul, and I'd love to just have them know who you are before we get started. So who's Paul Sletten?
I'm the owner of a dental practice transition company, and I've been at it a very long time, more than 40 years. And I'm live in Denver, and we've done transitions in all 50 states. And every transition, it's been fascinating, and it continues to be. Every transition has the fundamental basics in common with each other, but every one of them is unique because the practice culture is unique as an extension of the core values of the owner or owners. And that's what really makes it fun. I have to go on record and apologize to all the specialists who have had to sit in dental meetings and try to interpret how it might apply to them when transition issues are discussed, because those seminars are almost all directed at the general dentist. And that makes some sense because 80% of the population are general dentists, but the specialists get left out. Mm-hmm. And there are some really important things to talk about and to discuss with them. So I'm really glad to be with you on this topic today, Kirk.
Yeah, I love this. We have a special place in our heart for the specialty practices. Yeah. Give us kind of the why and the lay of the land. You've been having a lot of these conversations recently. Where are we at on this map with specialists?
What is going on is that when we talk about transitions in general, every person thinking about transition has to put a plan together. And in putting that plan together, we've talked about their need to do it 5 years in advance of when they intend to implement it. And the reason for that is there are some things to understand. I'll give you an example. Orthodontic practices and pediatric practices are similar in that pediatric practices, when I began in my business, were incredibly dependent on the referral community and getting little kids sent over from general practices. That didn't turn out to be such a sweet deal for the pediatric dentists in that they got all the problem kids, and they got the little wild men and women, and and that made it difficult. For a very long time now, pediatric dentists have been generating their own referrals and building their practices that way, and orthodontists have as well. Orthodontists still rely more on referral base than pediatric dentists, but there's been an evolution, a shifting of the way they do things. So a pediatric dentist can pretty well put a plan together like a general dentist does. And that is all of our plans, as you know, Kirk, that when we work with a client are to help them put the business plan together and the timetable and the action steps that lead to the actual transition. But they're also going to want to link that practice plan with their personal life plan. And that applies to all specialists as well. If you contrast what a pediatric practice does compared to an endodontic practice or an oral surgery practice, those two practices are unique. An endodontist or endodontist group of doctors, if it's a group practice, they need a succession plan. You know, what happens when Mary, who founded this practice 38 years ago, walks out the door, having retired? What do you lose? What walks out with her? And what are you going to need to do in terms of defining an ideal candidate profile for the young doctor that you're going to go out and recruit and bring into the practice to move into that practice culture? What other partners are going to have to step up in some areas where they hadn't been responsible before because Mary has always been the visionary and the keeper of the flame? So succession planning is really, really important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so talk about the unique differences for endo and oral surgery if it's not a group practice or if it's just a solo practitioner.
Okay, these two specialties, of course, are heavily reliant on referral. And so they work hard to build and retain referral relationships. And one of the cautionary tales that you hear if you listen to people who tried to retire and had a difficult time in it, in getting their practice sold for what they thought it was worth, is that they had missed the point of understanding where they need to keep their referral base expanded in terms of the age range. So if you are a 65-year-old endodontist in solo practice and you're getting ready to retire, there's a great chance that your entire referral base will be within 10 years of your age in either direction, and they're all getting ready to retire themselves. So a discerning buyer candidate coming and looking at that situation will notice that, of course, because that's part of the fact gathering that they will ask questions about when they're looking at whether they should be interested or not. And if you have a tight bunching of the ages of the referral community that aligns with the seller's age, you're going to have some problems because all those practices are going to turn over and you have no way of controlling what happens when the new owner takes it in a different direction, perhaps.
Yeah.
And there are so many things that can be done by putting a great endo process together. And so they need more lead time. And while it's totally natural and understandable that they're going to have a referral base that's within 10 years of their own age in either direction, it's also they need more time to do it because they need to keep bringing on younger referrers.
Yeah. And that was good.
Yeah.
That was
Go
going to
ahead.
be one of my questions. I mean, even when you talk about dynamics in a church, they always talk about the average age of a parishioner. You know, if the average age of a parishioner is skyrocketing, you know the church is in trouble. So we need to always be introducing a younger population. And so as a specialist, that's one of the things you got to be keeping tallies on. So I love the idea of having this window 10 years in each direction, but being cognizant of the age of your referral sources.
This very thing has happened in our church. I would say it happens in every church in America. It happened at our golf club, you know, where you all of a sudden have an aging population and need new young members to keep it going. And so that same principle really applies here as well.
Yeah. How does I'm just curious from a patient dynamic too. I would imagine the same window exists for patients, or am I just speaking too much in generalities if I'm a 65-year-old endodontist?
Yeah, the patients, there are some changes there in our society, of course, in that patients are living longer, much longer, in many, many cases on the norm. And so that isn't quite as much of an issue. It is an issue. But you've got to, be sure and continue to meet people and continue to be intentionally visible. But one of the barriers, or one of the things that block that kind of thinking, is if you're solo practice and you're going hard every day, you're not thinking about growing your patient base.
Mm-hmm.
And so after a while, the practice even becomes a little bit stagnant. And it's what the predictability is for whether a person's going to be, the buyer is going to be able to afford to buy your practice, and will it cash flow well? So you got to really keep a really sharp eye on attrition in your referral base, and just be mindful of that. If you're in your 40s right now, and you just keep that in mind as you go through the remainder of your career.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Oral surgery is the same thing.
Yeah. Now you hear all these rumors. So again, I don't have any data to be able to support this, but I just came back from the ADA SmileCon. It's great. And I bounce around in all of these rooms and talk to everybody. And you hear this, well, specialists are dying. They're drying up. You know, I'd love for you to speak to that component. And then also, you know, this one drives me crazy because everyone's like, everything is group practice. And I'm like, no, it's not. Can you speak to specialists drying up and everything is group practice?
I would love to. Everything is not drying up in the specialties. It gets back to me, it gets back to, what are you doing to keep your practice healthy? Mm-hmm. What are you doing to continue to have a setting of practice culture that people thrive in and love to be part of? If you're doing that, you're not drying up.
Right.
If somebody goes to sleep at the wheel, that could happen, of course, but I don't see that as a generality. And the other thing is about the death of solo practice. I think solo practice and the people that we know and see and work with is alive and well.
For sure.
I mean, some really amazing people that you work with and that we are blessed to work with are thriving like crazy and really enjoying solo practice.
Yeah. And I want to just caution, if you're listening, so you're going to jump to another podcast. You're probably going to go to a Facebook group. You're going to jump to other things, and you're going to hear the collective, you know, influencing financial powers that be in dentistry say, you know, the solo practice is dying. Well, let me just say why you're hearing that message, because there's a lot of money if I'm selling a widget to find the big practices and cash flow what I'm doing. There's a lot of money in rolling up your practice and combining it. But let me remind you, there's a lot of money, more money than you could imagine, probably long term while you're working, if you own your own business and you call your own shots. Now, that's my own personal opinion, but I'll speak to this. I don't know anybody. I truly do not know anybody who's like, I don't know, my practice is dying. I don't have anything to do. most everyone I speak to, run into, coach, they are like, I'm too busy. I got too much going on. I got to figure out what to do next.
Yeah, I think that's, I share that view and I share that experience in encountering people like that.
Mm-hmm.
So if you get around to staying in a solo practice, it's more challenging at transition time if you haven't kept your referral base broad and had it in good, once again, in good, healthy condition like your practice is.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that. So if I'm buying an endo practice right now, what am I really paying for? If you were coaching me on, like, you and I are going into I'm the endodontist, you're helping me. Like, you're telling me, Kirk, this is what we're going to be looking for with this endo practice.
If I might just take a brief step back, I would say we're working with someone on that, in that exact situation right now, a young endodontist who's looking for a practice to own. He's been an associate in 3 different practices over the last 6 years, and he is looking for something to buy that can be his own. And so when we started with him, the first questions we asked him, do you know what you're looking for? Have you identified what would be an ideal setting for you? Where do you want to live? Where do you want to raise your kids? Where would you feel great practicing? What kind of practice do you want to have? What kind of a team do you want to put together? What are your thoughts? What are your money issues? What kind of school loan debt do you have? What size practice are you looking to buy? And the thing about endo practices is that they're so doggone profitable. It's just amazing.
Yeah.
It's not unusual to find one with 65% profit margin, pre-tax, as you know, and they have the lowest overhead of anybody in dentistry.
For sure.
Yeah. And no hygienists, no lab bills. Well, they do now with because they're doing extractions and all of that.
Yeah.
Placing implants.
I got to get
Some are.
I know, absolutely. I got to get the listener caught up on this, because this is why I love Paul the most. If you listen carefully, he's like, where do you want to live? Where do you want to raise your kids? You know, what kind of practice, what kind of team do you want to have? Like, getting all of those things right, while it's going to limit your options, you know, you're now going to go from 50 opportunities down to 10. You know, that is a good thing, because the options you now choose stick longer. You'll ultimately be happier. And I've seen this, which you have too. People fly to a town, unfortunately, when a specialist passes away, and they're like, oh, there's this perio practice, and this dentist unfortunately passed away. I'm like, where is it? And they tell me, and I'm like, that's like 6 states away from here. And it's in the middle of the state. Like, are you sure? Well, it's a great practice. I'm like, have you really talked to your spouse about this? And they're like, no, I'm going to go check it out. So sometimes those stories end up pretty well. But really, at the end of the day, the reason you became a dentist was you wanted to wake up and enjoy your life. So that's why the first offer isn't always, you got to find the right fit for you. And that goes for anybody. It goes for your kids that you might be teaching anything. It goes with your practice that you're going to purchase. So I just love the quality of your questions, Paul.
Thank you. The kids, your kids can learn a great deal and add some life skills themselves by watching mom or dad go through a transition. You see what it takes. You have to do a whole bunch of clarifying. You have to, whether you're buying a practice and getting into practice and launching a career, or whether you're ready to get out. And the planning skills are life skills that kids need to be exposed to intentionally. And there are great benefits that come when that happens. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. Go ahead. You had another thought?
I was just gonna say, going back to a prior comment you made, it's important for people to understand that several of the loudest preachers out there saying that solo practice is dying or dead and comparing it to the dinosaurs, they're investors in DSOs.
For sure. The reason they speak so loudly and so well is they are the ones positioned to benefit the most from you buying what they're selling.
Right. Exactly.
So, go ahead.
As we're working with this young endodontist, we're asking them all these questions, and they're getting as a couple, and you need the input of both parties. They're both huge stakeholders. One will run the practice and be in the practice. The other might very well not be in the practice, and but nonetheless, they're influencers. They need to make some decisions together. Do they have it's selecting a community. There are awesome practices available in smaller towns. I don't mean tiny towns like the one I grew up in of 2,500 people, but I mean 50,000, 60, 75,000. There are unbelievably good lifestyles available in communities like that, and amazing practices. And I strongly recommend people at least look at those. If they have proximity to a major city, that's even better. But there are great lives to be lived in places like that as well as an option.
For sure. And can I ask you, and you can say, hey, look, it varies, but let's go through each one of them. Endo, oral surgeon, no different than a GP in some respect. You don't need every single person in a 50,000, person town. An oral surgeon probably needs how many patients and how many docs referring? I mean, if I'm a solo doc.
You're looking at, I'll give you a big number and I'll give you a small number.
Great.
A big number would be 45 to 50.
Okay.
To have a relationship with that many people. But you're going to make it or break it based on the dirty dozen. If you have 12 great referrers,
right,
who are just, you've got a career.
Yeah.
As long as you nurture those relationships and pay close attention to them.
Yeah, that I've found to be absolutely true. It's the 80-20 principle. 80% of your referrals are going to come from 20% of them. And no different than you coding patients A, B, and C. Every specialist I know has got their A referrals, their B referrals, and their C referrals. And they treat them all with the same level of dignity and respect. It's just that the A referrals get better access and maybe, preferential scheduling in some respects. So it's important to build the right practice that way.
I agree.
Yeah. I want to go to profitability too, because as a specialist, you taught me this. If I'm a young dentist, now let's talk as a seller. I'm selling a specialty practice. Profitable practices are the best ones to buy in some respects too. So building a monstrosity where you have a 78% overhead, that's not so easy to sell as a practice that has a 55% overhead. Is that true if I'm a specialist?
Totally true. Yes, it's absolutely true. We see practices that are, everybody is likes to talk about $1 million plus practices, and we've seen a ton of them, but we've seen some marvelous practices that are generating less than $1 million and a really excellent bottom line. We have a periodontist practicing in the Keys in Florida, who's doing slightly more than $1 million a year on 3 days a week, and has a net of 600,000.
That's great.
Yeah,
it's great. It's a great place and a great net.
Yes, exactly.
And a great work week.
Right, exactly. And he takes a whole bunch of weeks off.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So that's another thing. There's so many things you can do to tailor a schedule. You guys are experts at this at ACT to help people. By tailoring a schedule and your work commitment, your clinical time at the chair commitment, then you can do all kinds of things with that are creative and that will blend in beautifully with your lifestyle.
Yeah. I'm just a big fan of living in this country, and you get to choose and you can make your rules. And if you don't like the rules, you can change the rules. You can change them back. You can try everything. So don't ever think as a listener, you're kind of locked into something. No, you're not. Not at all. You can change anything at a moment's notice. And then anything else you would say, like from a selling standpoint, like if I'm a seller of a specialty practice, what are some other red flags or important items I really want to focus on before I transition out?
Yeah. Let me address, Kirk, if I may, periodontal practices.
Please.
Perio practices have been going under, they have been, the specialty has been evolving and morphing into something very different than it was 20, 25 years ago. When every periodontist in the country had a huge hygiene practice within the practice, that's not so much the case anymore. Some still do. So I just want to use the periodontist as an illustration of what's happening within the specialty practices. All specialties have evolved. And perio has really evolved. And so periodontists are key players in these dental teams that work together to help an individual patient. And it would typically involve a periodontist or an oral surgeon and an orthodontist and a restorative dentist.
Yeah.
And they work on these amazing cases with life-changing results. And that's got to be fun.
It is so fun. It's funny you bring up the periodontist too, because I meet a lot of great periodontists out there and I love it. Yeah. And when people tell me they're a periodontist, I go, you got to tell me what that means, because sometimes you find the true perio, you find, now somebody will say, well, I'm perio, but I really focus on implants more than anything. And it's very interesting how you can let those practices evolve. And I even see it in oral surgery. We did a study group with a lot of different oral surgeons and took a look at all their numbers. And one was as different as the next one. No, I make all my money on thirds when you're looking at these particular months. So keep that in mind, that just because you're a specialist, they are as different as the next one. There are those nuances that are somewhat similar, but when you find what you love to do, you can certainly transition harder into it. Great example of it. I know a dentist, a phenomenal young dentist, who's a periodontist, and he's a true perio, perio guy. He bought an implantologist practice, and he's like, listen, I get where this guy was going and I totally respect it, but I'm going to go in a little bit of a different direction. Yeah. And he's been killing it. And it's amazing. So don't ever feel like you're painted in a corner when it comes to specialties.
That's a good comment. I agree with it.
Yeah. So what other thoughts or considerations do you look at when it comes to transitioning this specialty practice?
You look at, there's a timetable that's in place from the time that a specialist makes a decision to transition. This is why you need a 5-year plan. It predictably is going to take longer to recruit a specialist than a generalist. That there are notable exceptions to what I just said, but that's true, like what I just mentioned. It's going to take longer. So you're going to have to, if you're going to do a search, let's say you're solo and you're going to do a search, you need to plan on it taking 2 to 3 years. It can happen faster than that, and you need to be prepared if it does and ready and flexible, but it could take that long, especially if you're taking the time to be really selective so that you leave your team and your referral doctors in a great place by bringing in a successor that they're going to relate to.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a gift to all of them and to the new person taking over the ownership.
For sure. And I was just going to ask you about that because I get to see all different kinds of situations.
Yeah.
So let's say, let's say I'm an endodontist listening and I'm like, okay, I get started. I bought this practice. I started on my own. Then I brought in another endodontist. And we grew together. And this endodontist is 20 years younger than me. And so now I'm going to get ready to transition out. So I'm selling my specialty practice to my younger potential partner. Any considerations you would say in that when I'm looking at the long haul of my career, if that's my trajectory?
That's a great question. If you have a 2-doctor partnership, your operating agreement for the partnership between the 2 partners should have a clause in it. And the typical clause that you see way more than half the time is that the younger partner would have the first right of refusal to buy the practice on notification of your intent to retire. That's the wrong way to do it, in my opinion.
Tell us
The
why.
bias, I think you're way better off having language that requires the partner to buy it. It's good for you because it ensures you, the seller, of not having to go through some steps that are indeed avoidable. And it's really good for the younger partner because it allows the younger partner to bring in an associate of their own choosing and move that person through a process where they eventually become an owner as well. They recoup their investment with that person buying in with them, and they're not forced with a partner not necessarily of their own choosing.
Yeah.
Which if you're the selling doctor and you have to go out and find your own person, certainly with the involvement of that second doctor, but then you're forced with an instant partner. You don't want that.
Yeah.
You don't want an instant partner that you haven't taken to several dances.
Well, that's what I was going to, I mean, that's brilliant there, Paul. One of my questions is, do you still see first right of refusal? Because if I'm the younger partner, the last thing I want to do is pass up on this and then have you select who you're going to sell the practice to and say, guess what? I found your new partner and he's not as nice or she's not as nice as me, type of a thing. Do you still see the first right of refusal language on contracts?
We do. And I put it right in there with, we certainly do. And I put it right in there with another common practice that I used to see 40 plus years ago when I started in the business. And that was that you never tell the team until you've sold the practice.
Now you have to talk about that.
Both of those issues they defy logic. So if there's a lot of people who are brokers in the country, dental brokers, playing tightly to the notion that you shouldn't tell your team until you have the deal all finished. And why? What's the rationale behind that? Well, they'll tell you that you run the risk of losing your team if you tell them that you're leaving. And I say you run a far greater risk of losing your team if you don't tell them. And why not invite, once you've made your choice, your decision, why not invite your team to participate in the process actively? They should meet the candidates. You should get an idea from them what kind of personality and what kind of a skill set, attitudes, core beliefs, would fit in your practice culture.
Right.
They're the one with the best insights to that, right?
Yeah, I love what you're saying too, because I just saw one of my favorite docs this last week, and he did exactly that.
Sure.
Now, there's a difference, and tell me if this is true. When you're a doctor selling and you have low trust, you could certainly embrace the whole idea of I'm not going to get involved with letting them know that I'm transitioning or who's going to buy it, because they don't trust. We've got low trust to be, but when it's high trust, like you should have seen the look in his eyes. He's like, they already knew I was transitioning. They knew I had their backs. They knew I was going to try to find the right person. And I asked him, I go, how's it going? He goes, it's going better than I ever dreamed. And I told the kid when he bought it, my job is to make you successful. Like I reinforce, you own it now. And like, he's like, he was so happy to describe that. So I couldn't support more of what you said, Paul.
Absolutely. I'm not, there are wonderful exceptions to everything. I was just in Minnesota recently working with one of your clients, solo practice, great team. And he actually said he'd been listening to one of our podcasts and heard me talk on this issue about when to tell your team, under what circumstances, and what would the timing be. And by the time I got there to talk to him about his help him put a future transition plan together, the team was, coming up to me and saying, "We're excited about being part of this."
That's awesome.
We are really in a good place because he trusts us enough to take us into his confidence, because we know it's a highly confidential situation, to the patients and the community and everything, and we'll honor that. And that was a real happy atmosphere.
Yeah, love hearing those stories. And you hear I hear from team members all the time. They're like, "Oh yeah, he already told us he's going to be slowing down in the next 2 years." He's kind of, so the really high trust teams that really have done a great job of staying together, the expectation is clear, and usually on the other end of it, as an owner, they care a lot about the people that have helped them build this. So they want to leave them in great hands too. Correct?
Yeah, absolutely. We had a periodontist in Billings, Montana, who called me, and he said, I'd never met him before. And he said, "I am so tired of tap dancing around my referral doctors and our patients and my own team when they ask me the question, 'How much longer do you intend to practice?'" I said, "What do you say to him?" I said, "Well, I'm not going to leave anytime soon." And I start tap dancing immediately and avoid answering the question. And I said to him, "What you need to understand is when somebody asks you that question, they're really asking two questions. The question is, how much longer are you going to be here, doc? The second question, and the real question, is, what will I have to do when you're not here anymore, doctor? Will I have to leave and find another practice?" And so I said, so lean into it. Don't tap dance, lean into it.
Right.
And say, well, I'm going to retire at some point in my career. By the way, when I do, what kind of a person would you want in here? I'd love your input.
Yeah.
And he just turned the whole thing around, and he just had a blast.
Yeah. It's so great that you illustrate that, because that's where a lot of people think. They think if I'm going to leave, everybody else is going to leave, not only the team and the patient. Right. So I just got to get my money before I do that. And that's not true. And we teach dentists all the time, not even just with transitions, but like anytime you're making a change. This is really important if you're listening. When you're talking about change, it's okay to discuss change, but also never forget to discuss what won't change. So yes, Mrs. Patient, there is a chance I will be transitioning out and I will find the perfect person. But what won't change is how we care so carefully for all of our patients. So you can count on that from my team and from this practice. And I think that's really important. And it answers or addresses both of those things, Paul, that you brought up.
That patient will breathe an audible sigh of relief.
Absolutely. And if you can say, you got to say it from your heart, they know it's going to be true, and you do too. So
exactly.
Yeah. What else about the landscape? Because again, there's so much chatter around selling a specialty practice. Any last thoughts you have on, that we can use as guidelines going forward when we hear this chatter?
I've even heard things like periodontal practices don't sell for as much as they used to. Endodontic practices don't sell for as much as they used to. That's not true.
Yeah.
If they're a great practice, and if it's really a healthy practice, they sell for top dollar. If they're in a desirable location in a good suite, and where the owner or owners have taken really great care of the referral community that supports them, they're selling for top dollar.
Yeah.
And that's just the reality of it. So when people ask me a question, I would say, let's say 20 years ago, somebody asked me the question, which they did all the time when I was speaking at seminars and workshops. They would say, what are practices going for now in America? And I would flip them some kind of a percentage that was accurate, that represented, 65% of last year's gross. That's not net. That's not how we do the valuations, of course.
Right.
But you could generalize a lot more than you can now. So my question, when they say, what are practices going for? Where do you live?
Mm-hmm.
If it's Austin, Texas, they're going for real top dollar. If you're in the Front Range in Denver, you are as well. If you're in Atlanta, parts of Atlanta anyway, you'll get top dollar. If you're in Washington, you will get top dollar. And then there's all kinds of really, really good markets where people with healthy practices. That's the key. This is what you do. You and your great people at ACT. You end up having them, you help them grow their practices, and you help them be happier.
Yeah.
And that's what you want to be part of.
Absolutely. There's plenty of money to be made in dentistry. And
yeah.
I would say this not only for specialty practices, but for GP practices or anybody in the dental profession as a whole. I mean, this is such a noble, incredible profession.
It is.
And all of the experts clearly indicate dentistry is not drying up. It's not going away. It's over a $350 billion industry, and it's going to double within our lifetime. So there's going to be a lot of people in this world that need dentistry. And if you're a specialist or a GP alike, you can see when you look into people's mouths, they're just not naturally getting healthier all around the board.
Boy, that's a fact.
That's a fact. So rest assured, you're going to have plenty to do. Your job is just to figure out how do you want to do it and who do you want to do it with and where do you want to do it. And when you're thinking about all those things or you're looking to transition, Paul's your guy. So Paul, if I'm thinking about this and I'm in my mid 50s or early 60s, what do I do? Can I reach out to you? Can you walk me through this? How does it work?
I had a call yesterday morning from a general dentist who's well known in Denver and has a wonderful practice, saying, I think I need a practice valuation because I'm at the very early stages of planning my transition. I said, what are you talking about, early stages? He says, I think I'd like to be out in 10 years. He said, but I want to know what my practice is worth now so that I can appropriately put that into my plan. And so I have conversations like that all the time.
That's
people.
Awesome.
If there's something on your mind or you have a question and you haven't been able to get a satisfactory response somewhere, just pick up the phone and give me a call or email me at paul@lifetransitions.com. And
Awesome.
I'll be happy to sit down and talk with you.
Paul, I am so grateful. As always, you always help us navigate this. And you're just a good human being. And I really appreciate that about you.
Thanks, Kirk.
So thank you, buddy. So I know if you're not taking notes, don't worry. We're taking notes for you. You can flip up to the notes, whether you're listening on Stitcher, iTunes, Spotify, doesn't matter. All of Paul's information is going to be listed down there. There'll be links. You can just reach out to him and you're going to see he is just as nice when you talk to him personally as you experience on this podcast. So hope you guys enjoyed today. Keep sending us suggestions for things you guys want to see. You're going to see we've got an amazing lineup coming your way. So keep sharing this with your friends. And until we see you guys next time, or you hear from us next time, keep watching or keep listening to the Best Practices Show. You guys enjoy your day.